This is the first of two videos on types of chemical reactions. I'm splitting this into two videos just to make this more digestible. So I'm going to begin here with just two types of chemical reactions, anabolic and catabolic. In chemistry, we often talk about synthesis reactions, those reactions in which we build a small number of large products from many small reactants. So we start with many small molecules, put them together to build a small number of larger molecules. And in the process, energy is consumed and stored. So kinetic energy is being converted to potential as we take many smaller parts and put them together to make a bigger whole. In biology, we often call the synthesis reactions that occur within cells anabolic reactions, and that's the term I'm going to use here. So here's an example of anabolism. This is an important example. We start with adenosine diphosphate, ADP, shown here, and we can combine this substance with a phosphate ion and some kinetic energy, and we add that phosphate to the ADP, we get the larger ATP molecule, which has more energy stored in it. So when we combine phosphate and ADP with kinetic energy, we yield ATP. This is an anabolic reaction because we start out with more smaller reactants and we end with a larger, higher energy product. In decomposition reactions in chemistry, energy is released as a small number of larger reactants are broken down into smaller products, and several of them. So we start with something big and break it into little pieces, release potential energy in that larger molecule, and in the process free up kinetic energy. In biology, we call decomposition reactions that occur within cells catabolic reactions. And so here's a very common and important catabolic reaction. We'll start this time with the ATP molecule, and instead of building something with it, we will break a phosphate off of it. So we'll pull a phosphate off the ATP, yielding a phosphate and an ADP, and in the process release kinetic energy. So here we're doing the opposite of anabolism. We converted ATP to an ADP, a phosphate, and energy. We took one larger reactant and broke it into several smaller products, along with releasing some energy. In biology, we call all of the anabolic and catabolic reactions that occur within a cell collectively metabolism or metabolic reactions. So when we talk about metabolism in the human body, we're talking about these chemical reactions occurring within the cell. Let's just take a look at how cells use anabolism and catabolism briefly. Let's start with glucose. This is one of the most important energy sources for cells. And one of the main ways in which cells process glucose is through a catabolic reaction or set of reactions called glycolysis, in which glucose is converted to pyruvate. That conversion of glucose to pyruvate frees up kinetic energy, which we can then take that kinetic energy and use it to drive the combination of ADP and phosphate, an anabolic reaction, to produce ATP. Once we have the ATP is what I like to call the cell's energy currency. Cells break apart ATP to provide energy to do most of the things cells do to stay alive. And so that breakdown of ATP is itself a catabolic reaction that we just looked at. We form ADP and phosphate and release kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy can be used to drive cellular work, which is anabolic. And when I say cellular work, I mean moving things into and out of the cell, building new molecules like DNA or proteins, assembling structures within the cell to keep it alive, doing other chemical reactions in the cell that are needed for the cell to be alive. I'll talk more about this in class, but this is the basic framework that you want to think about. Catabolism of external energy sources drives the anabolic formation of internal energy sources, which are catabolized to drive the anabolic processes that keep the cell alive. Synthesis or anabolism is building larger products from many smaller reactants, and in the process consuming or storing kinetic energy as potential. In decomposition or catabolic reactions, potential energy is being released as kinetic energy through the breakdown of a smaller number of large reactants into a larger number of smaller products.